Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, December 10th, 2020 Special Board of Education meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock for items listed on the agenda. Governor Pritzker recently extended the disaster declaration related to the COVID-19 pandemic for all Illinois counties. Based on the current public health concerns, the board president of Elmhurst Community Unit School District number 205, as head of the public body, has determined that it is neither practical nor prudent to hold an in-person public meeting on December 10th, 2020. The board president is further determined that it is not feasible for the public to be present at the public body's regular meeting location due to the health concerns related to COVID-19. This board meeting will be remote and comply with the procedures set forth in Public Act 101-640. Furthermore, due to the pandemic, this meeting will be virtual. Public viewing and participation will be by electronic means by clicking on the video button found in Board Docs. And with that, the meeting has been called to order. We have all 7 board members present. And at this time, I would ask that we would stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So before I read the public comments thing, just as an aside, next time public comments will be in a quote live format, and the procedure will be listed on the agenda for the Tuesday, December 15th meeting. So I wanted to make the community aware of that. Written submissions will also be accepted and submitted into the minutes and posted on the website as well. So for up to 30 minutes, submissions of public comment received before 7:30 p.m. on the day of the meeting will be read aloud or summarized after stating the name of the author. Comments received before 7:30, which are not read aloud or summarized, and those received after 7:30 will be reviewed by board members. All submissions received will be made available publicly on the district's website. And you could see agenda item 1A for the link to post a comment. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Troutman to read the public comments for tonight.
Thank you. First comment, Shirley Stiltson. I implore you to return our kids to school by January in the hybrid setup with plans to open up more as allowable. With the mitigation policies in place, school is now a very controlled environment and is desperately what our children need. They are falling behind academically and deeply suffering emotionally. I hear story after story of children who are despondent, having thoughts of or plans of suicide, or are involved in self-harm. Please give us a choice with what we need to do for our children. As parents, we would also like to know which parts of the curriculum they have missed and will miss so that we can help catch them up in order to start the next academic year and not be at a deficit. Thank you so much for your time. Next comment, Cindy Harrison. When I hear the public comments at these meetings, I can't help but think some of the good people in our community have unreasonably high expectations. As long as I have been in Elmhurst, our district has used a guru-focused and consultant-directed decision-making process. This has always met with the approval of the board and most parents. Suddenly, we are in a pandemic and people are expect the district to switch over to data-driven decisions guided by the most up-to-date evidence. I assume that once this is all over, D205 will be expected to pivot back to the guru consultant model. Major transitions are difficult even for big corporations, so assuming our school district will change over immediately and flawlessly doesn't seem realistic. Next comment, Jason Garcia. Earlier this year, we were excited to send my stepson back to in-person learning. Despite everyone's hard work, we found in-person learning was remote learning plus babysitting. I don't blame the teachers or principals because hold on. Because I can't think of a way that any teacher could teach 2 lessons to 2 groups of students simultaneously. Will in-person learning in 2021 be a discrete experience with a dedicated teacher, or will it again have a teacher trying to do 2 jobs at once and doing neither well? Next comment, staff member. Hold on. I have concerns about all students returning to school in January. If data shows there is still a substantial spread of the virus, I would urge you to consider waiting until conditions improve. But if you decide to move forward, please move the in-person start date back to January 11th at the earliest. I am mainly concerned that families will gather indoors without masks during the New Year's holiday, thus increasing the likelihood that students come to school with COVID, as we saw with the return of students after the Thanksgiving holiday. Next comment, Andrew Hamill. Dear Board of Ed, thank you for your efforts during this very trying time. Remote learning will never be a replacement for in-person learning, and yet we must be patient until it is safe to return to school. Today in Illinois, there were 11,000 plus new COVID infections, and this daily number is expected to continue to rise after the holidays. As you continue to discuss the reopening of schools, please do so with a focus on the safety of our students and staff. Please listen to all stakeholders, not just the loudest. Please recognize the amazing job our teachers have done learning new technologies and new ways to teach. It's been difficult to read some of the online rhetoric about the teachers union and the perception that there's an unwillingness to return to work. What is missing from these characterizations is the union made up of people who may have underlying conditions that make them more susceptible to COVID, or who may take care of compromised loved ones or elder family members. They have concerns about getting sick and infecting their own families. Please be flexible in your decision making. If COVID infections continue to rise, January 6th won't be the time to reopen. Please invest your time and efforts in making remote learning better, not just reopening schools for the sake of having bodies in buildings on Zoom. Next comment, Michael Thompson. Kids want to be teachers when they grow up, and for good reason. Nurturing, fun, exciting, developing, and really cultivating how a child grows and views our world. Let our district leaders on both sides of the issue now give our teachers the opportunity to win back the students, to connect with them, to be the role models that our kids need them to be. We can all appreciate how fearful it can be to go out in public, to the grocery store, convenience store, church, parks, doctor's offices, etc., and how it can be just as easy to enter our schools, uneasy to enter our schools. But let's not forget how impactful it is that you as an educator can literally infuse your influence in a child so that they will remember you forever. We need to maximize this potential for teacher and student directly by returning to school in person. Through these 3.5 months of school, I have been pretty discouraged by the current remote learning Zoom teaching format and how it has prevented my child from reaching excellence in academic, social development, and interpersonal growth, from achieving that high point of his potential. My son cannot fully engage in this type of screen-based learning environment, devoid of natural and meaningful peer-to-peer interaction. He has not had the opportunity to establish friendships, be a part of a team, and to comfortably, something keeps moving. Sorry, folks, hold on. Comfortably express his ideas in a classroom. These children are not afforded the time and attention that is imperative for their growth, and I don't think the instructors can fully engage and connect with each child at all. Why and how is this acceptable? At what point do our leaders make a stand for the betterment of our teachers, students, and community? It's a call to action that has been going on for some time now, and very simply, it's time to answer in full support of direct in-person learning. Thank you for this opportunity to express my opinion. Thank you for the opportunity, the board members and administrators, for the time and effort you are all putting in to help our students, and thank you to parents of D205 for continuing to push and advocate for our community. That's the last comment.
Okay, thank you. And just, to follow up, we've received a lot of hundreds of emails over the last few weeks. And I just think it's important that the community know that we do read them, and we have taken the themes of questions and points that are made and incorporated them into discussions where possible, and tried to have them incorporated into communications that come out for the district. so that the community will can get the answers. Tomorrow, I believe there will be a follow-up communication to tonight's board meeting. And in it, it will have a link to an email address that will say Ask D205, and you can submit questions there, um, so that it's a little, no matter who's asking, we can get the questions and the answers out, and they'll be posted. So details about that will come out tomorrow in the follow-up communication to tonight's meeting. But that way there's a place for people to send their questions, and that way the community can see, many times it's the same question coming through. So, and a special thank you to Bev and communications for that. All right, so tonight we have one agenda item. It will not be short, but there is one agenda item, and it is January return to in-person learning. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moyer, who's going to walk through kind of the overview of where we are, and then we have different pieces to discuss in order to prepare for January. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, so the last month or so, administrators have been meeting regularly to try to plan for what January can look like and a return to school in person for students. And so what many of our district office people have been doing is meeting with our principals and other groups of people throughout this process to come up with what we're going to present tonight. Now, what we did is we reconvened our steering committee from January, and we ran these ideas through that group and refined some of the things that we ultimately are bringing forward. And that's how we got to this point. So what we believe is feasible and appropriate is that on one of the items on Tuesday's board agenda will be a request to approve our 5th remote learning professional learning day that is allowed by the state. We received all of the iPads that you approved, and we want to use that 5th day to bring an Apple trainer in and make sure that our teachers get trained. And we would suggest that day be January 6th. Then we would suggest that January 7th and 8th be remote learning days, and that we resume the hybrid models of instruction effective January 11th. For all of the students that did not return on November 30th. And January 11th is 10 days after New Year's Day. So that gives us a 10-day period where hopefully people will stay home and make sure that they are ready to come back to school and self-certify and provide the safest environment possible when they're here. The goal is that once we bring students back, that we would not want to have to go to a period where we go back to remote as a district. What we would then do is be more surgical about any closures that are necessary, whether it be a classroom or a school or any type of circumstance like that. Athletic teams, if they were to return to participation or whatever, but we would make decisions like that if we felt that they were warranted, but we would not want to go to a situation where we go back and forth between hybrid and remote as we did this time. And that was part of the original concept that came forward to you. So what we have are schedules for each of the grade levels, and they're based on a couple factors, they're based on some academic factors and feedback that came to us throughout this process from various groups of people, but they are also based on two other primary factors. One of which is that the results of the remote learning survey, in which we know how many people intend to come back from remote learning to hybrid learning. And the second is the advice from an infectious disease doctor that has indicated that if we're going to bring people back in a period of substantial risk, that the one thing that we have to have absolute fidelity to is masking. And in order to make sure that we do that, one of the things that we would have to eliminate is snack breaks. And so the steering committee considered an alternative elementary school schedule that eliminated a snack break, but that also resulted in students going home from school earlier, and decided that that probably was not something we should bring forward. So we did not bring that forward. What we're suggesting at the elementary level is that we would leave the schedule the same as it was in the fall. We would eliminate snack breaks on inclement weather days, in which case parents would have a choice to decide whether or not they would keep their kids home remote, or whether or not they would send them to school without a snack. The other thing that, the other piece of advice that we got from the doctor is that it is important to preserve the 6-foot distancing, and that relates to the facility issues and that we have for space, and the responses that we got from the remote learning survey. So at the middle school level, we have one school that we're particularly concerned about, which is Bryan, although we are confirming at a second site, Sandburg, but we think that we're going to be okay at Sandburg, in which we cannot preserve the social distancing with the number of people that want to return to Bryan. So that schedule, when we go over the schedules, you're going to see that that one looks a little bit different than the other two middle schools. And that was a decision that is coming out of the committee, that we think that if the goal is to get as many kids in school as often as possible, that we should not have the two other middle schools affected, or any other grade levels affected because of one school. So that would only apply to Bryan. And Scott will go over that in a little while. At the high school, there are some modifications to the Bell schedule that are due to academic and other reasons based on feedback and other considerations. But there are no changes to the AB model that is currently in place there. So those are some of the items related to the return to school in January. And then another component that would be a separate agenda item on Tuesday is surveillance testing, the saliva testing that we had talked about at a previous board meeting through safeguard screening. And if we were to adopt testing, I presented some options with some costs associated with them. And the two primary benefits to testing would be reduce anxiety among staff and create transparency concerning the current risk based on available data. So we would have ongoing internal data that would give us some indication that we feel we can go comfortably forward, safely opening schools on an ongoing basis. And the second primary advantage is an additional layer of prevention against a possible outbreak in a school by providing school-specific surveillance data. Now, the testing is a surveillance test. If somebody tests positive, they still have to go back and get a second test. It would primarily serve to prevent outbreaks or transmission of people who were asymptomatic, but it is not completely fail-safe. You don't necessarily catch everybody, but it is another potential layer of protection, and that is something that I think the board will need to decide one way or the other on Tuesday so that we can make sure that it's up and running in January if it is what the board wants to do. And I do think that the health and safety of our employees, there could be some benefit to considering it from that standpoint, primarily, again, for the psychological factors and the assurances that we're doing everything possible to preserve a safe environment at school. We consulted with an infectious disease doctor on the testing. It's the same person that's consulting with Glen Ellen. It's the same provider that is working with Glen Ellen and New Trier. So we've talked about some of that before. The consultant, the doctor, Dr. Dworkin, is the Associate Director of Epidemiology and Biostatics for the University of Illinois Chicago's School of Public Health. And he has advised that the minimum threshold for us to think that we would have some type of return on investment with the testing would be 60%. So what we would suggest is that if you want us to consider testing, that we send a survey out to people and try to confirm approximately how many people would participate. And obviously, the more the better, and the closer to 100%, the better. And the other thing that I would just bring up for the sake of this is that I'm suggesting 3 options that you consider. We would test all athletes. We would make it available for all faculty. And then we could consider just testing 612, or we could consider testing everybody, all of the rest of the students, or we could consider starting with testing all of the students. And then if we get very low rates at the elementary, and we don't think that that's something that we maybe have to continue, we could discontinue that at some point in time. So the cost is $11 a test. And obviously, the more people you test and the higher participation rates, the higher the cost. Now, the original thought process with the testing was that if we can get through a holiday surge, if we can get closer to warmer weather and closer to the vaccine, that maybe we could bridge January and February and do this as a temporary measure, or the board could decide if it wanted to continue it. And that would be a decision it could make. So that's what I have on sort of the introductory comments and some of the information on the schedules, the rationale, the updates on the information, and the testing. So the next thing I think would be to just actually present the schedules themselves. Now, since there are no changes in elementary that are being proposed, we really don't need to necessarily share the elementary schedule like we would if we would be considering a different option. I do also want to say, before we show the 6, 8, and high school schedules, that we did consider a phased-in approach where we might bring the younger students back earlier in January, stagger it a little bit so that we could keep the total occupancy of the buildings at a lower number for a couple weeks in January after the break, moving to increasing the number of students that are in the buildings over time. But the steering committee believed that the community has made it clear that it wants students back in school, and that if we're going to bring them back, that we bring them back. So that's it for me at this point. So I could now turn it over to Scott to review the scheduling recommendations.
I just want to interject before you start in, Scott, sorry, that just I think important note is the snack piece is due to the substantial transmission. So that's why the snack time was a point of conversation. So I don't know, just think that is important to clarify and communicate. And then
that's correct, Kara. If we go back into moderate, then we re-examine, various different processes, and you're right, that's something that we can, that we can adjust.
And then this schedule is, Scott's going to talk about schedule changes, and that primarily at the middle school, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, has to do with the fact that we have more students. One of the reasons, more students wanting to go from only remote to hybrid.
That's correct.
Okay. So with that groundwork, have at it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to just start off by celebrating a couple of points from first semester. One of them being the attendance rates for the entire district from second grade through 12th grade have all been above 98%. In the high school, where you oftentimes focus in even more on some of the attendance rates and can see some of those challenges take place. We're at anywhere from 99% with our freshmen all the way up to 98.7% with our seniors. So that's over just a roughly 2.5, 3 month period from September to the end of October when the data was pulled. We have some really great things taking place. People are trying to do the best they can with what we have in front of us. And I've heard that sentiment across the entire Chicagoland area with a lot of the fellow colleagues that we've been trying to consult with. And everyone has really been collaborative in different districts to compare models and look at what's working, what's not, and to come up with really the best iteration. And there hasn't been a ton of intellectual property, on that. Folks have been willing to share, folks have been willing to give ideas. Frankly, a lot of the work that we started in the beginning of the year has been stolen by other districts. And I think that theft has been, a really nice compliment to us. And that's been, shared out as well. So that's a good thing. That said, we still haven't been satisfied with what we've come up with. And we've been trying to really just constantly balance the different priorities that are in front of us. Obviously, always having safety in front, but trying to make sure the instruction is better and making sure that folks, regardless of if they're, trying to help students that are in remote learning at home or they're in an in-person hybrid, have the best experience. So to do that, we have 3 proposals for shifting a couple of adjustments. One is the daily bell schedule in grades 6-8. The other is the possibility of what we're calling a contingency weekly schedule that currently was built to address the 6-8 challenges that we might face, but might be used in other scenarios if needed. And then the last is an updated bell schedule in grades 9-12. It might be most helpful for me to contextualize and start with the second item, which is the possible contingency schedule for grades 6-8. As Dr. Moyer mentioned, we have upwards of 90% of students that have selected to return in person for second semester, which is great and is a reflection of everyone wanting to get back into school. But with the physical distancing constraints that places, we've come across a real challenge specifically at Bryan Middle School. We've already been creative. The staff has been very supportive, and we've worked to really find a way to utilize the spaces there as much as we can. We've met and have consulted with White as an architect, and there's been some heavy data analysis taking place, going as far as looking at every single classroom square footage and the rosters for those classrooms, and individually going through each of the 179 sections to see if there is a opportunity to move students, to reconfigure classrooms. We've looked at different furniture models. It's been really everything has been looked at. And that said, we're seeing capacity issues there. So what we are proposing in terms of the weekly shift would be going from what currently took place the first semester, which is AA remote BB, to having a different model. Can I share a screen? Is that something that would help folks with that? I didn't see anything in board docs.
I don't think,
RJ, would that be?
I don't think there's anything uploaded on board docs.
Scott, I just gave you sharing permission, but I can also pull it up. I think I got that memo.
Is that something you could do on your end, RJ? It might help.
Yeah, it's not in board docs. It was sent to you separately this afternoon. We needed some time today to work through the information that we shared with you because of the timing of the steering committee yesterday. So
Thanks, RJ. If you, yeah, if you could go to page 2, that would be great. If you can go up a little bit. Excellent, right there. Thank you, sir. So this is the current schedule that we had first semester. This is what we'd like to continue on with to the fullest extent. I mean, obviously, we'd like 5 days. We've looked into that, but given the need to distance the students, we are still in a situation at both Churchville and Sandburg in which we need to split the students. So that would ideally put us back in the AA remote and then BB schedule that we had first semester. That seems to work. We did have some challenges in different sites, but we've been able to work through those. The principals, counselors, teachers, and staff, particularly today, I met with a group of counselors and principals in AP, and they've worked throughout the day to make it work. So kudos to them. However, Brian, the situation that we mentioned is more challenging. If you can scroll down a little bit, RJ, please. You'll see here what we are proposing to do. This is perfect. Is to adapt a contingency model that would have a third grouping of students. So rather than splitting the students alphabetically in half, we would have a roughly 30 to 34% split, and would determine the letters based on what gave us that, to have the students attend class based on the day of the week that their letter falls. Similarly to the model this first semester, if I was a C student, I would be learning remotely on the days in which I'm not in school. And then when I'm assigned to that day, I would go in person for in-person hybrid. And I would still have some experience, obviously, with the synchronous piece and the simultaneous teaching that the teachers have been working through to the best that they can. What we tried to do in this model to help visualize this, if you could scroll just one more row, please, RJ. Thank you. Is to show that how this falls out in terms of a 4-week monthly breakdown would be, given the schedule that we're trying to propose for first semester, we would increase the minutes of instructional time with some additional remote learning to compensate the loss of potential in-person learning. So first semester bell schedule, we had students in the building for roughly 2,400 minutes a month. If you adopt the second semester bell schedule, that will turn into 1,800. However, you'll have 3 hours and 20 more minutes of instructional time a week. And the reason I will go back and show you that is there's been an expansion of the day in this proposal to have instruction take place throughout the entire day versus the 1:30 stop time that took place first semester. So the students would be going till roughly, I think, 3:35 in this current proposal, which I'll show you next. And that, I think, is going to allow for a more full day. We've heard some requests for that. And I think will allow for the dismissal times to work out, and will also compensate with the ABC model. So the reason this whole idea of reconfiguring the schedule came about was the potential loss for schools like Bryan, if this takes place, of the Wednesday. So having Wednesday interventions and Wednesday support time lost because of the ABC model, we needed a way to build that back in to the daily bell schedule. Before we look at the bell schedule, it might be helpful just to pause for questions on the ABC side of this.
Okay,
Well,
so I'm going to
first,
ask, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Kara. Go ahead.
No, I guess, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the challenge, are we just talking 1 or 2 kids, what
Yeah.
extra, how many, what the impact is. And then the second thing is, have you exhausted, I don't know, using the library space or these different, just if
Yep.
you could elaborate on some of that so that
Yeah.
we can think through that, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so Sandburg is in a similar situation in which they have roughly 16 spaces that they anticipate will be over capacity based on square footage and social distancing opportunities in the classroom. And that's when I refer to social distancing, I'm talking about 6 feet space in between desks that allows for, a safe spacing based on the guidelines we're following from the governor's order, as well as, the square footage of the class. So they have each walked the building, generated square footage, have used blueprints, have used buildings and ground support to look at every single space. And at Sandburg, they're doing exactly what you described. They were able to look at the 16 spaces, go through the list, potentially move students if needed in certain locations, and also then utilize some of those, alternative spaces, library, et cetera, based on the time of the day. Brian, however, has a few unique situations that just weren't allowing for that to take place. They went as far as moving desks to the walls, trying to have it so that there's more of a perimeter approach, have done a number of things, generated photos of that, have recalculated it. And unfortunately, in those 40 spaces, you have anywhere from classrooms and sections with 1 or 2 students to classrooms and sections with 5 students over that capacity. So the average was 3.5 as a total out of the 40 in terms of 3.5 students over per section, but obviously there was some fluctuation there.
And I just wanted to clarify, Scott, that the reason that that's happening is because the demand for in-person learning has gone up, right? So there's folks who want to switch from remote to in-person.
It has gone up. It's been tight to begin with, but it is the request for the remote learning for the in-person hybrid learning that's gone up.
Mary Ann, can you just jump in and review those numbers from the survey? We probably should have had you do that before Scott got started. I apologize for that.
Sure, no problem. I'm pretty good at them by now. So we sent a form out to families of fully remote students, asking them if they would be interested in returning to school in person in second semester. And we got responses from 366 of them that said that they would, which brings the total of in-person across the district to about a little bit over 85%. And that varies across buildings, of course. So some buildings have as much as 95% of their students in person, and some buildings have lower percentages. So that's kind of a high level summary of that information.
With Brian clearly being the one that already had, there you go.
Yeah, overall about a quarter of fully remote families, asked to come back in person. Part of it also, of course, depends on the buildings, the specific spaces at the middle schools. It depends on the specific schedules of students and which classes they're assigned to and all of that. So, it can vary. Even though some buildings have higher percentages, they're not seeing those same types of issues.
Dave, can I use Edison as an example? So if you look at Edison, they have 95.6% of their students that they want in person, but they had such a high number to start with that, for example, in first grade, Jim only has to accommodate 5 to 8 more students. So, and he has the space to do that. So that affects it as well.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I wanted to highlight that. I think it's an important data point, because this is a survey that was administered, during a period where COVID cases have increased locally. And, the collective wisdom of thousands of parents when they sit down and think about what is the right decision for their child, right? The most precious thing they have, right? They're increasingly choosing in-person learning, despite the increase in COVID cases. And I think that that's very telling. That's a very valuable data point to me. And I wanted that data to come out. So thank you for clarifying that. And then Scott, if you go back to the ABC chart there, I just wanted to make sure it was clear that that's sort of a contingency if the 6 feet can't be met, and that the base case is a continuation of the schedule that was in place before with slight modifications, correct?
That is correct. We hope at the other middle schools, specifically Churchville and Sandburg, that we can continue on with the AA, students being split half and half, AA being Monday, Tuesday, all students remote Wednesday, and Thursday, Friday being the BB students. And then obviously on the flip-flop days, you are able to gain some of that synchronous instruction as well. This would be specific to Brian. And in the event of something else that were to take place, should we need it, it seems to be a model we would want it to be consistent, for purposes of childcare and, parent consistency. But right now, Brian seems to be the only school in which we are seeing the real definite need for this.
And last question for me,
Go ahead, Chris.
last one. The increased instructional minutes, if you could provide just some insight into how that will be allocated. And,
Sure. I think that's helpful. That's a good segue too. And then Karen, we can come back to, of course, whatever you have in mind. RJ, if you don't mind going to page 1, I just wanted to kind of frame the ABC because I think it helps explain a little bit more as to why we even thought about changing the bell schedule at the middle school. So currently, that's great right there. Thank you. Currently, the students, this is not the current schedule. This is the proposed schedule for semester 2. Currently, students in the middle school go from back in the in-person hybrid format, they would go in person from 8:30 to 1:30. The feedback we received with that in the afternoon was opportunities for asynchronous learning and student and teacher check-ins. The feedback we received on that was there was no breaks. Transition time was very minimal in between classrooms, which made it difficult to maintain the schedule in person. And it was a long day for the students. And we also received a lot of feedback that the day quote unquote ended at 1:30, and that was not what we intended for it to be designed for, but that was some of the feedback we received. What we're trying to do in this model, we also had the Wednesday opportunities for intervention in the AA remote BB model. In this model, what we're trying to do is build in daily opportunities for intervention and enrichment for students in the core academic areas. Those would take place for 30 minutes. We do not have those currently in the schedule. The schedule would also allow for maintaining a larger amount of time for the cores, which is 60 minutes total there. And it would have an earlier dismissal for in-person instruction of 12:15 to allow for the lunch and the travel to then have the students restart the remote learning day in the afternoon. And they'd have a full afternoon of remote learning based on the elective blocks being moved from in-person to remote. So in terms of the allocation of the minutes, the way that those minutes added up in terms of gaining back the 3 hours or building in an additional 3 hours in comparison to first semester is it's 3 hours and 20 minutes of new mandated attendance-based remote learning in the afternoon. 3 hours and 20 minutes, sorry, per week as a total.
So Scott, if I could just ask a clarifying question. So it doesn't matter if you're AB or ABC. If you're in person, you're only there from 8:30 to 12:15, no matter what?
In this model, yes. Can you scroll down a little bit, RJ? Thanks.
And so
that's correct.
So our students are only in the building from 8:30 to 12:15. And am I wrong that, which happens a lot, that the core blocks are now fewer minutes individually? Because I feel like I think, and I'm getting the schedules confused, so please correct me, but I felt
no, you're right. So the core block would go down 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're decreasing the core block time, but increasing the day.
Correct. So the core block would go from 65 to 60. And then the additional, the E blocks would take place in the afternoon. So the additional time is built in for the intervention enrichment in the morning, and then the office hour, it depends on the grade level, but I'm looking at 8th grade. They have an intervention enrichment in the morning, and then there's 2 sets of office hours and breaks built in the afternoon to help with some of the remote learning fatigue, as well as the support.
And was there discussion about, that morning enrichment time, adding that into the afternoon time when students are home, everybody's home? Because I feel like now we're all weighing the risks, right? Bringing the kids back into school, but now we're bringing them in for less time on their core blocks and increasing their day, as opposed to increasing that time on the core blocks and getting that enrichment stuff, kind of in the afternoon when everybody is remote.
So the enrichment and the intervention was more of the driver of this, and making sure that was prioritized in terms of attentiveness and actual attendance, and making sure that if we have remote learning attendance issues or students that aren't showing up to that it isn't taking place remotely. So that was the reason that was really focused on, is having in person, was that seemed to be the big priority for the staff and for the students, to make sure that they are able to support their needs. And the thinking was that in person would make for that to be more meaningful.
One thing that I want to throw out there too, please, is just to remind everybody that, as we talked about, when you see the high school, there'll be some more minutes. When you talked about, the snack break being on hiatus here, and we had to make these adjustments, we also had to coordinate everything with busing. So there are some considerations that had to be taken into account with dismissal times to make sure that we could accommodate that factor as well.
I guess I'm just struggling with, because, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the core blocks for each of them, they will rotate between social studies and science each day, right? So we're losing minutes, and we're also, so cumulatively, you're losing more minutes social studies for science each week.
So you're losing the 5-minute piece. That's correct. However, you're gaining the instructional minutes with the remote piece. So there is some loss in person, and that's, we'll be very transparent about that. It's less than ideal. However, the idea here is that you will gain it back with having the remote full day in the afternoon. Another key piece I want to mention is the schedule would allow for some of our students with high needs to still attend in person. Currently, we have students who attend 4 to 5 days full based on their needs. And that's the other reason for that in-person intervention and enrichment time, which I think is going to be really helpful for those students. I forgot to mention that.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm really happy you brought that up. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out while we're on the schedule is that, for the ABC at Bryan, and potentially other middle schools if it happens, or other schools if it happens, specifically at Bryan, and I think Karen has mentioned this, at least I've heard her say it before, I think it's important for Bryan families to understand that these spacing constraints do incorporate the new construction that has gone on. Those are spaces that are being utilized. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are spaces that have been taken into consideration when determining how many kids we can bring in the building.
That's correct.
So Scott, are we saying that we're over?
And they are getting one less day of in-person learning every 3 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's every
3 weeks is the cycle, and they're getting 5 days versus the 6 days at Churchville and Sandburg.
Correct. Every 6. Yeah. Every third week. Correct.
Right. So a 3-week range. So I just want parents to understand in the Bryan community that it's not like that new construction project that's finished and empty right now is not being considered and utilized when you're trying to figure out this schedule.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Scott, are we saying that we're over in both sixth or seventh and eighth grade at Bryan?
Correct.
So every single grade we have over capacity. And
That's
is
correct.
it over capacity at the substantial level or anytime we're in person?
We're
It may-
over capacity.
Mary.
I mean, it doesn't matter what the transmission rate is. It's just a matter of, you know, the particular classrooms and their sizes.
Well, but that's based on the, the 3 to 6 foot, right? And we're
It's
saying
based on a
6 feet.
6 foot, yeah.
Right, but I know that there's talk about, moving that. So, what we're doing is being extremely conservative. Safety for staff and everyone is what it seems like the guidelines are here. So this is worst case scenario.
Well, I think it's following the guidance that we have as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, as we know of what's going on, that there's a lot of new stuff coming out that we'll evaluate, and, we've got the infectious diseases, experts and all. So I just think that we need to highlight that it is based on the original data that we're putting this around.
It's based on the existing guidance from the state, and also, as of yesterday, guidance from the infectious disease doctor that we're consulting with, who
Right.
indicated that the 6 feet, the 6-foot guideline is something that we should not deviate from.
Well, especially because we're in substantial.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to say that that's for sure what his response would be in a different situation, but that was
Right.
definitely what his response was yesterday.
Right.
I'm sorry if I
Okay,
could,
so-
I'm sorry if I could have just asked one more follow. Karen, I'm so sorry because I forgot one thing. With the new, I see that intervention enrichment period at the end of the in-person morning, Scott. I mean, are we thinking that could be used for those, and I have always been a huge fan of this, those acceleration periods for kids that did not need intervention and enrichment? I mean, my 6th grade son learned sign language that I'm not sure exactly what he's saying to me in it. He still uses on me as part of an acceleration program at the middle school. And I'm just wondering, like, I love having it there for the kids that need it. Is there something we can do with it so that, a group of kids is not logging off at 11:40 and doesn't have to be seen again until 1:05, right? Like this, I'm just wondering, can we utilize that intervention enrichment and make it /acceleration?
Well, everyone would have it. We would use data and make sure we are addressing any gaps for those in the intervention side of it. The enrichment piece is intended to be more core focused, just given the heightened state of concern with COVID, and making sure that our specifically reading, ELA, and math elements are addressed. So it wouldn't be the traditional acceleration focus in terms of, as you mentioned, some of those more exploratory and unique opportunities like sign language. That's not to say that's not something we couldn't look at in the future. But for right now, the main focus would be making sure that the core needs are met, just to make sure.
And so are those kids going back to their homerooms? What are they? Because that's during the in-person time.
Correct. So I don't know if they would go to their homeroom, to be honest. I don't have that part with me tonight, but they would have a designated staff member, and it would be time every student would be accounted for, and it'd be very tailored. So we're not looking at like a study hall at all. That's not what this would be. It would be more of a, what is Scott's needs and where does he go based on those needs? Does he, need intervention? Does he need enrichment? And then we would structure and schedule the teachers accordingly for that from the core teachers.
And I'm just trying to, in my mind, envision what a movement and scheduling nightmare this could be, because, you might And there's no student that has the same, right, intervention or enrichment needs. Like my daughter might rock it in literacy, but need help in math. Another student might need help in social studies or science. So there's just a lot of moving parts there. And I'm just trying to understand, especially when we're trying to keep movements minimal, what that looks like in any of the middle schools.
Yeah, so we wouldn't change that with any major frequency, just to make sure that whatever intervention or enrichment we are utilizing, that there's adequate time. Oftentimes it's 6 to 8 weeks to make sure that that the actual practice is progress monitored and that there's signs of improvement. So there wouldn't necessarily be a lot of that fluctuation that you're referring to, which I think is good to mention on the operational side. But it will be challenging to schedule that and to gather the data. And the principals have expressed that. They were very influential and involved in designing this. But this is no easy feat. None of the things that we are presenting have been at all swift in any way. In fact, I wanted to mention that just presenting the shift here with the remote learning, while it's great that we gain those hours, 3 hours and 20 minutes a week, this is really difficult for teachers to process and see the loss of their students that they want to be with. But it is a model that will allow for us to meet some of those priorities to the best that we can.
Yeah, I applaud the effort because it does seem very complicated to me, because I think that you are trying to provide this very personalized in-person experience. So I applaud the effort, and I recognize the challenges, and I'm just going to give it up for all the teachers that are going to implement that, because I do have confidence that they can do it, but I do recognize how challenging it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So have we looked at maybe having the 8th grade class go to York? Is there space there to create room at Bryan?
We have talked about some of those creative opportunities. In fact, I was going to kind of save the fireworks for later, but we do have one unique experience developing in which we're hoping to utilize the York National Honor Society and allow for peer tutoring of our students in the middle school. And this schedule would also fit really well with that in terms of the puzzle pieces, with possible office hour opportunities for those NHS students to work with a teacher. So if you can imagine being a teacher who is grabbing and working with a select group of students, putting and meeting with them virtually, and having an actual NHS member is sort of an assistant to help you with that. So we're excited about that. That's pretty fresh news. So we are looking at the collaborative, moments from 612, but in terms of moving students, it seemed logistically very challenging.
So there's not a possibility to at least take 8th grade class out of Bryan to alleviate the overflow and minimize the movement, but at least gain some space somewhere at York?
Not currently.
What would be involved in rolling a few classroom trailers onto the Bryan site?
We have not looked at that.
A trailer is, I believe it's $250,000 for 2 classrooms.
How many would we need?
You have to buy them, you can't lease them?
That is leasing them. That is leasing them. That is the number that we got from, that is the number that we got when we were entering into the construction project and we talked about temporary classrooms. So I don't know if that number has changed, but that was a number I recall from a couple years ago when we were going through that process.
And that would be the price for the full year, sounds like.
Yes. I don't know how the contracts run with those and everything. So I don't know that I can speak to what an exact price would be. That's the only number that I am familiar with currently.
Yeah, I won't quiz you on trailer leasing. I don't expect you to know those numbers off the top of your head, but.
Go ahead.
Scott, I just had a question about the middle school schedule time-wise. And I know you have surveyed families about the learning models. Had you been told by parents and families that they would like a longer day in general for those students?
That was the case with the Wednesdays when we looked at the data from the week 8 remote learning surveys. The parents, preferred Wednesdays to be more of a typical attendance day, which was not the case with the students. We do see discrepant data in terms of what students are experiencing and feeling and wanting, and what parents are experiencing and feeling and wanting.
Yeah.
And we have posted that data as well on the website. So the Wednesdays, it was very clear that the parents did want a more typical attendance day.
I just am wondering, I know, everybody's been trying to adapt to these schedules and maybe try to find ways to fill that time in the afternoon. And it seems that the afternoon is stretched out a little bit by those check-in times between the E-blocks.
Yes, so those are very intentional based on some of the logistical and operational challenges with the teachers. So I just want to mention that they are just sort of
staggered for a reason.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so that time couldn't be shrunken down so that the kids are done at 2 o'clock. I guess I'm concerned about families that have already kind of created a schedule
Absolutely.
For that time in the afternoon, and now having to kind of reshift all of that again with this new schedule. I guess that's just my concern there.
That is a good point. We did look at that, and I did ask that question as well, and we did probe into that. But the reasoning is being that we do need to build that time, and it allows for the office hours and the break piece, which was helpful in some regard. But we tried to make it a more condensed day. But that was an item of feedback that each middle school principal has received regarding requests for more break when it's in remote, so that there's less of that sort of strenuous screen time that the students are going through. So it seemed like a good compromise and a way to make that work.
I do like the lunchtime break. I think having that break in the middle is nice. And I do like the core blocks in the morning when they're fresh and they might be doing some stuff that's a little more strenuous. My only concern, like I said, was just if those office hours could be all put together at the end of the day instead of staggered throughout. But if it's because of scheduling and teachers needing to meet and things like that, then I understand. Thank you.
And for me, the problem I'm having with this one, and I get it is Brian specific, but it could very quickly bleed into Sandburg, is that, Brian, the whole idea of coming back to hybrid, right, is to get students in the building for more one-on-one interaction with their teachers and more peer interaction. And for Brian now, they have one less day every 3 weeks to get into the building because of the numbers. I understand that, but now they're also having less minutes in the building when they are there. So they're getting hit on both sides, right? So that to me is where I'm struggling with this suggestion. I understand the enrichment and the intervention and the office. I understand all that, but I'm struggling with why this accomplishes really what we want to do, is more interaction with our teachers and their peers. And like I said, definitely at Bryan because of the ABC schedule, but it could happen at Sandburg. So I feel like this is something that I'm not comfortable with it. I guess I'll just leave it there. I'm trying to understand why we're coming away from what we did or what we're doing right now when we're giving them more minutes, like 8:30 to 1:30. So, like a kid is losing in person an hour and 15 minutes every day that they're at a building. I mean, am I doing the math right?
Nice, good.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's where I'm struggling, especially, and I know it's personal for me. I'm a Bryan parent, I acknowledge, everybody knows it, but so now, an hour and 15 minutes less and 1 day less. So that adds up to a lot of less in-person time for all those. Let's see, what's the Bryan number? 712. Well, wait, I don't know what the number is. Anyway, the number of 90% of the students, it ends up being overall less time in person.
So can I ask a question about, and Chris Walton, I hope you're awake. So has there been any thought to, because, you're dealing with, you've got additional numbers, could you do something where you bring some kids in the afternoon, like they do their core block in the morning and some are in the afternoon for their the e-blocks? And since I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it just seems, since the day seems split down the middle, is there any way to consider doing that to help with bring the numbers down that are in the building at a time? And I know it's a busing issue potentially, probably, but is that a possibility to consider?
He's either frozen or getting an extra set of lifting in.
He must be frozen. Scott, any thoughts?
We've talked about it. I mean, we have weighed out many of the options. I mean, the comments that Courtney shared are comments that were made in planning rooms as well, time and time again. And we really have tried to constantly balance the changing priorities alongside the need to just get students in person without sacrificing programming. And it comes down to, a lot of it is, the longer day allows for, a condensed schedule, but it's fast paced. And we get feedback about the lack of breaks, the need for a snack. We worry about some of the challenge that raises. We've gotten feedback with, what do we do in the afternoons? How come they end at 1:30 and then the day is over? So it has been a constant, battle to see what balance is the best for the students and what balance allows for a maintaining of that continuity. So I would feel a lot of the same way, and the sentiments shared, and definitely don't discredit them.
I guess for me, this travel and lunch, I mean, there is nobody in the Bryan School District that lives 50 minutes away. And I recognize that's a teacher thing is all, and I don't want to take away from that, but then it's butting up against.
It's actually more a parent thing. The feedback we've received is the need for a longer break. When we first drafted this, we had a half an hour in, and it just didn't seem logistically feasible. And we've gotten feedback on a need for more of a space in there as well. That came up too.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. We looked at a model with that too. In fact, what principals initially designed had a shorter period. I think it was 35 minutes. But we did have a series of feedback rounds with parents from different schools that expressed the need for a longer break.
Yeah, but that break could be incorporated in that, there is that office hours break in the afternoon as well. Two of them at every grade level. So there's an hour break in every grade level in the afternoon. That why can't we make the morning schedule longer? And listen, if it's 8:30 in the morning, we're not bringing them in at the high school level. It's 7:30. These are 8:30. And I get that snack is compromised, but a 1 o'clock lunch, is that, I don't know. This is just me. I just feel like less time is in person right now. And somehow that defeats the purpose of why we are trying to get our kids back in the building. That's where I'm struggling.
Agreed, Courtney.
Well, Courtney, it also seems like right now the kids are in school till 1:30, correct? So that's another piece of this that would change for families who maybe don't get busing and have to pick their kids up. They may have already worked their schedules out to work around that, and then we're shifting it. So is there any way to just keep that dismissal time the same? I know we're trying to get a break in there, or a little bit closer to what it is now, just to try to maintain some continuity for families in the provisions they've already put in place. And then that would increase that morning a little bit.
The morning intervention time, sorry.
Well, just to move the lunch a little bit later so that they would have that break.
Just switch that, just alternate the lunch, travel lunch, so it would go that first line, intervention for 6th, core block 3 for 7th, core block 3 for 8th. The next line would be, well, I don't know.
But we get feedback that they're in too long then. And that's been, one of the balancing acts we've tried to maintain is meeting the break piece. RJ, if you could scroll down a little bit. I mean, I think the real focus was on just building back, and there you go. Thank you, the green, the minute piece and finding a full day. That was one of the driving forces. It came down to intervention for students that are in school 4 to 5 days a week on a daily basis, and enrichment for those that can benefit from that as well. And then having the increase of 3 hours.
Is that building in the break thing something that parents are demanding or requesting during fully remote? Is that something they wanted if their kids were in the building?
Both, yes. Yeah, we've had that request on both sides.
Have we talked about it from the standpoint of, to get that, your student is in person less often? Like, I mean, do we present the trade-offs? Like, I think that if we proposed, like, to me, the priority seems to be in person.
Yeah, no, we agree with that priority, and that has been the driving force. But we are balancing everything. Everything has been a constant trade-off. When we pull one piece away, another one falls. It's been a constant, what can we do to get these students in the building for as long as possible with the best instructional model? This is the best we can offer, in my professional opinion at this time, based on the constraints and the striving of trying to make sure that we have some level of similarity to the best we can.
So help me understand if I were to explain it to someone. So number one is in person more often. How do I go about talking about the new proposal then?
In terms of like an elevator pitch?
Anything, just to, I mean, if the priority is the majority, which we saw at every single school, is get more kids into the school, right? It meant we want more building in school education.
So my answer to that is, in first semester, we had a schedule that was 5 hours per day from 8:30 to 1:30. We received significant feedback that the transition time in between class periods and the need for a snack was non-existent, and it was exhausting the students and leading to too long of a day. We are looking at models that allowed for the programming to maintain to the fullest extent possible while not sacrificing the core instruction, and adding in opportunities for daily intervention for those students who need it the most, and enrichment for those students who can benefit from that. As a result, we've had to shorten the day by about an hour per day to allow for the break time, the lunch, and those programs to still exist in the afternoon, which is now additional remote time.
Yeah, but for me, like, bottom line, and I get this is the Bryan community, which is 700 families. We are going from, in a 3-week period, to 30 hours in-person time to 17 and a half. Somebody check my math. I mean, that is a significant drop off from what happened this past semester. And that really does not sit right with me. Something's off there. And I get it can't be equal because the Bryan community is, the population's coming back in more than the other communities. I get that spacing. Even though I don't like it, I understand the ABC, but I do not understand the less hours per day that they're there, right? Like we're going from 5 hours a day to 1.5. And quite frankly, and I hear you, Scott, I hear that you are trying to respond to the community saying we want a snack, but I'm just going to say it, right? Like the community needs to understand. Everybody's doing everything to hear all the voices. Everybody can't have their cake and eat it too. So if you want your kids in the buildings for 5 hours, then there has to be some things we give up. And this is not a criticism of you, Scott. I know you are trying, or the team, you're trying to juggle all this stuff. But when you do the math, 30 hours in a 3-week window versus what you're proposing, 17 and a half, something's off there.
So if the schedule was, go ahead, Dave.
Our principals feel strongly that if we're going to meet the learning needs of our students, that the intervention time, that the dedicated time for intervention is critical. Otherwise, that change would not be reflected in the schedule that's coming forward.
And that is included in the mornings.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting taking away the intervention. I completely agree with your building principles. That is like, it's super important. And I'm not suggesting taking that away. That's 30 minutes out of an hour and a half versus 5 hours that we just had or that we were in person when we were in person this last semester. That 30 minutes is not on the table for negotiations. I would never suggest that we shouldn't have that period for those students that need it or for kids that need enrichment. But you're going from 5 hours to an hour and a half. No, I'm sorry. No, what am I doing? 2.5. Sorry, I did the math wrong. But you're cutting the time significantly, and something's off there.
So the weekly instructional time of currently first semester is 1450 per week. The remote time would increase that, which I think is worth mentioning and highlighting. We've also tried to maintain and look through some of the PE constraints that are now going to exist with the cold weather upon us. We've had the PE team doing the best they can outside. They've had creative opportunities to come up with things inside. So that was taken into consideration within this model as well. So it's been a lot, and I hear the feedback. I think it's good to share it and to consider it to the fullest extent that we can. We have gone through a lot of what these conversations are currently, but it is understandable.
Yeah, I guess my bottom line is there a way to extend, like Beth said, to have the schedule of in-person a little bit more second semester like it is this semester? And what would that entail? Can we just move the lunch hour down, or the busing back and forth and all that? So there's less remote, because the kids are going to be still doing a lot of remote, because the majority of the time they're remote. They're every afternoon, and then if based on their
Well, and I also think that
Chris, can you?
But I think people are responding to this schedule, transferring from all remote to hybrid, thinking that last semester is what they're getting, right? Like they think they're getting 5 hours of in-person time with their teachers, and that's not what they're getting.
Yeah, they're getting at least, the assumption will be that they're getting at least the same amount of in-person instruction, not less.
Chris, can you please explain the busing, because we can't move, we won't be able to move the middle school later without changing all of the other levels schedules as well.
No, I think 8:30 to 1:30 would work from a busing standpoint, because York gets out at 12:55, so that'll work.
Okay.
It was 8:30 to 1:30 before, and when we were in hybrid, correct, Chris?
It was, yes.
At the middle school.
Yeah.
So
is there any way that there could be a change for Brian, just Brian, not the other two schools, given the fact that they have an ABC schedule, which is slightly different than all the other schools anyway? Is there any way any adjustments could be made for Brian, since they are different? And if the answer is that's too complex, and then that's what we need to know, but we're, just posing that question.
I think we would have some challenges with that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask about that intervention time?
Sure.
My understanding there are some other districts that kind of hold that for the end of the in-personal instruction day, and the kids that are scheduled for those interventions just stay some extra time in person. Is there any way that would help?
We would want it for every student, and the way it would be designed for this is that every student would have something based on their needs, whether it be an intervention or an enrichment. We may run into some operational challenges with that in terms of the consistency. Busing might come into play in that model, as well as some of the afternoon programming. We have talked about, those opportunities. A lot of that does take place in the current model. It's a little more ad hoc, frankly, and a little bit more on a case-by-case basis, whereas this we feel will be more systematic and allow for a more structured approach to it.
All right, so you've thought about it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just on Margaret's question of, can you make adjustments to one building? I would be supportive of that. I don't think the all or nothing type of approach is applicable any longer for any of these buildings, right? And so if there's a custom solution to address Courtney's concerns that's palatable, I would certainly be okay with that, even if it didn't apply to the other middle schools at that time.
Can you just review, Scott, just because we're kind of, I don't know, maybe I need to review. What's the impetus for this change to make lunch sooner or to make them leave the building sooner? Can you just recap?
We run into a challenge regardless of the times and needing to have a split somewhere for lunch. And in all the models we played with, that seems to be the challenge. It's do you find time? Do you make the day as long as you can before lunch? Do you make the day as long as you can after lunch? How do you work around that? That's been a real big challenge for us in terms of one peg in this sort of puzzle that's made a real wedge, if you will. In terms of the impetus for the lunch piece, it's allowed for us to have the full program in the afternoon from 1:05 to 3:35. We need that time to fit in each class. Otherwise, you start to get into a situation in which elective blocks are becoming 20 minutes. We don't want to do that. But we don't want to do the flip side in the front and make core blocks really short too. So we've played around with several models. This is admittedly, I think, the 8th or 7th version that we've come up with. Some of the others played with some of the core times and tried to shorten those. We've been constantly trying to find that teeter-tottering balance on it.
Okay, thanks.
I do want to highlight some items in York. I don't mean to divert in any way. We can come back. I just think York allows for a couple of, I think, really good opportunities for second semester. Each course period in York is similar to the first semester, but each course period would be extended by 5 minutes. We looked at, we have a comparison model we used. We looked at close to, I think, 25 other school schedules, as I mentioned, many of which were very similar. Many have utilized an off day, whether it be for intervention support, MTSS structures, remote learning, etc. So this is consistent with first semester with a few exceptions. One is the addition, as I mentioned, of 5 minutes per day, with the addition of 15 minutes on Wednesday, which I think is an increase that is quite significant. The dismissal time on Wednesday remotely would go from 12:50 first semester to 2:15 in the second semester. And then the dismissal times per day would go from 12:35 to 12:55, as you see in front of you there. We did look into late starts significantly, and initially thought that was going to be a model that would go forward. Student feedback on that was less interested in the late start than we initially anticipated, as well as the prioritization of athletics and extracurriculars coming into play. And that if I'm a student that is a B student and I have practice, ideally back in the in-person time, that might start around 3:30 or 3:45, I would have a difficult time getting to that if I was off-site. We also had student feedback from the scheduling committee that shared that there was an increase in student employment in some of their peer networks, some of it COVID related due to parents being unemployed and students playing a little bit more of a role in the household in that regard. So we tried to honor that to the extent that we could, and looked at the late start opportunities with lunches and found roughly 68% of the students have a natural late start, with their lunch falling into period 4 or 5. And they can still arrive early if they'd like, and there's a space for them in the morning for that. I think that is everything from the high school model. If you go to the next page, please, RJ. There is an increase in minutes here, as we just mentioned. It totals roughly 2 hours and 35 minutes per week, which is a significant jump from first semester, and puts us right in competition, if not better, than many of our other high schools in the area. Any questions, thoughts on the York model?
I was just gonna say thank you to Shahe for, having the kids involved. I think that's been an important piece that, has maybe been missing at different points. So thank you to him for including them and just really having a collaborative approach on this. So thanks.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it strikes a balance of, a lot of parents have provided feedback, both high performing students that are taking AP classes and other students who are struggling, that more instructional time was desirable. And so this does that. And it also accomplishes additional time in person, which I know many would like to see that even higher, including myself. But, understandably, at least it's a starting point from here, both in terms of overall time and also in-person time. So I think it's a good starting point at the high school level.
Yeah, I echo that as well, because the collaboration that Shahi has established at York with teachers and parents and students on these committees to come up with this solution that's not perfect for everybody, but that's what compromise is. It takes everybody's positions into account and comes up with the best possible solution. That's how we should proceed as a district, and it's just a great example of collaboration and working together. So thank you to all the kids and the parents and Shahi and his team who spent a lot of time getting to this point, because I think this is the model of how we should make decisions that impact not just our students, but our community and our teachers.
Yeah, I'd like to pile onto that as well. So thank you for the collaborative model, and thank you also for considering the late start. I'm glad it was talked about
Extensively too, and we really were thinking that would be the direction to go. But the students, they don't hold back with their feedback, so it's been helpful.
Well, I think we need to listen to our kids more.
That's what you guys have educated them to do: express their opinions. You're succeeding.
There you go.
Hey, great, Scott. This looks great. Thank you for all your work on these schedules. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This is, I think that is it on my end.
Well, so I don't know how, and somebody can give me some direction. I know this is a discussion with all of us here, and it's a great discussion because I like to hear all the different perspectives, but I just don't know how we proceed on the middle school thing, right? Like, even if, and I'm just like trying to do the math, and somebody can correct me as always, but even at the other buildings, they're losing, and I know the chart says a 4-week time, but I just did it in that 3-week schedule because that's what Brian's got to rotate through. Even in a 3-week schedule, every middle school kid, so if you're a Churchville kid or a Sandburg kid, you're losing 450 minutes of in-person time in a 3-week period.
You're losing in person, you mean?
In person, yes.
In person.
In time.
Okay. Yeah.
And Brian kids are losing 775 minutes of in-person time. That's a significant amount of time, in my opinion. And I don't know, I'm not going to keep beating this horse, but this does not feel right to me. And it does not feel right like this is the will of the community. We're bringing these kids back in. The main purpose, in my mind, is for that in-person experience. And we're losing it. We're doing less than we did this semester when we were there. So,
Scott, I know sometimes when parents are there, or any of us are thinking through some of these pieces that, it would be helpful if there was a break in here, or if we had this certain thing. It's hard to wrap your head around what that looks like when all of the pieces are put together and you have to think about busing and the intervention time and some of these other things. Is it possible maybe to get some feedback from parents and students on what a couple different schedules actually look like and see before they're implemented, and get a little bit more feedback when they're looking at the actual schedule altogether, rather than just talking about a break time or an intervention time?
Well, we have tried to pool that. It hasn't been, the feedback model hasn't been as structured as the scheduling committee at York. Admittedly, they haven't had the same challenges in terms of the logistical roadblocks that the middle schools are facing with their schedule. So that's been some of it. We have used the staff feedback. We have talked to several teachers about the model. We've used a lot of the parent input along the way to try to, streamline it. We looked at the week 8 survey results from the students to try to see, what do they want? What do they need? One of the pieces of feedback we received in that week 8 was, students having expressed, as well as the staff, just the difficulty in meeting student needs in that, setting. So that's kind of where the intervention piece came. One of our frankly, largest areas where we could grow was that area of having students feel like, they had, the question was asked, teachers notice if I have trouble learning something. And that was our area where we scored the lowest, unfortunately. And the staff expressed that too, and wanting to help students when they notice that they're struggling, or finding ways to notice it. So that was the driver for a lot of the intervention piece. So that these things have been, definitely talked at length, and I think it's helpful to have the continued input.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
But so to build on that, on Courtney's line of questioning though, so can we flip back to so basically at high school level, the in-person minutes are increasing, overall instructional time is increasing. At elementary level, it's essentially the same schedule that was in place recently without changes, except for, we won't have snack on inclement weather days. And so really the issue is just at the middle school. And I'm trying to understand, the more I'm looking at the schedules and thinking about this. So is it because the kids can't eat in the building? Is that why we're having to make this change? Like, when we really just narrow it down to what is the driver here? Is that it?
That's one of them. We can look at expanding the core and having a later dismissal time. We will get feedback and pushback around a shorter lunch period.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things. And I think, as you articulated, there were many considerations that we had, and we had to try to take into account. So trying to take all of these considerations into account, we ended up with this schedule. So if there is a prioritization of if we prioritize some of these issues that were brought up, and if we prioritize it higher, that they have more time in school, and and then the break time becomes a lower prioritization. Is that something we can do? And we know that there's going to be pushback. We know that that's not going to work for 100% of the population. So we know that up front. But is that something that we could look at doing and maybe make this adjustment for the middle school program?
Adding the minutes in the front?
Yes. Is that a possibility? And again, we know that there's going to be pushback. We know that a certain percent of people are going to have challenges with this change in schedule and not being able to eat, having their students not be able to eat until much later in the day. We know that that's going to come. But if we can say our number one priority was increasing the number of minutes of in-school time, and therefore we came up with this schedule. Is that a possibility that we could consider?
Of keeping the lunch, Margaret, you mean at 1:30 later in the day, so that the morning is longer when they would be in person? Is that what you're?
And I don't even know if it's 1:30. I don't know if it's 1:30 or if it's, 1 o'clock, which would add another 45 minutes to the day. I don't know what that timeline might be, or if it's 1:05, whatever that time frame might be. But just making, is it possible to take a look at making that slight change?
The challenge we will run into, we can do that like anything. It's going to be there's going to be a trade-off, as you mentioned. However, one of the challenges that we will come across in that model is we will lose opportunities for synchronous electives. If we start to eat into the afternoon more, we will not have the equal distribution of minutes, which will make for challenging time in delivering synchronous elective blocks. And even right now, it's a challenge in which the teachers will have a difficult time finding a balance in terms of the synchronous and asynchronous piece. Adding minutes and shortening the lunch, I think the parameter there in terms of looking through the schedule options, we would want to keep the 1:05 end to lunch to the extent that we could, so that we could have a solid e-block experience for those students in the afternoon. Otherwise, we start to eat away at those times, which now start to diminish below 30 minutes.
Well, you're eating away at 1 hour of time in the afternoon for office hours and break, right? Which, and I'm not trying to take away from the importance of those things, but, and I also don't think 1:05 will work, and Chris can.
Yes, I was about to say that.
Yeah, it won't work for busing.
Yes,
Right.
York's getting out at 12:55, 1 o'clock. That's not going to work.
Right,
1:30 was good.
1:30 works because that's what we've been doing, and New York's not, changing much. So it's 1:30. I mean, so it is building in that travel lunch period. It's adjusting it, and so that the in-person time is until 1:30.
It would just shift down. So the e-block, or the, one e-block would go into the morning, and then the lunch would slide later. So you would still have, I guess that's why I'm just confused about why the e-block would have a hard time if you're just kind of swapping one for the other.
And the e-blocks are 30 minutes where the travel and lunch is 50, right? So if we did an e-block and switched it forward, it would, instead of ending at 12:15 plus 30 would be 12:45. And it sounds like Chris said that
it would have to be, we'd have to shift it until, so the lunch would be at 1:30 instead of that e-block there.
Yeah, then add 2 e-blocks into the in-person time, or an e-block and an office break, whichever, depending on your grade level. And then get them out at 1:30.
So is it fair to say that we're okay with elementary and high school, and middle school, we'd like you to look at it a little more? You've heard the concerns, I think, and see, the clearly the in-person piece is the priority. Is that fair, board members? That's what, the in-person piece is the priority. So, because I think we should move on to the other things. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's for me.
All right. So thank you, Scott, and everyone that helped with that. And
Thank you.
on to, what's next?
Well, we need to have some idea if you want us to pursue testing. I mean, that's the outstanding conversation.
All right. So we're talking about coming in, insubstantial, correct? That's, we're anticipating that January 11th would still be insubstantial.
That's what I would anticipate at this point. I mean, we have no way of knowing, but that's what I would anticipate.
And so testing would offer another level of mitigation. Is that how you would describe it in the doctor that you're working with?
Well, yes, it's an added layer of mitigation, and as I said before, it's got some potential benefits, but it's far from a panacea, and it is something that some other districts are doing, and that we want to have you consider if you think that's the direction we should go. And, I just think the benefits that I described, the potential to try to prevent an outbreak, and the assurances to our employees that we're doing everything we can to provide the safest environment possible would be the potential advantages. The disadvantage is that we really, from a return on investment standpoint, we can't guarantee that that we're going to catch every positive. We can't guarantee that there will never be some type of situation that occurs at school, even when we're testing, et cetera, et cetera. It's a preventative measure that may have some positive impact.
Yeah. So Dave, can you go back? I know it's been a little while. Can you go back over the parameters that you talked about in testing? Can you go back through so you can refresh everyone's memory after we had that long discussion?
We think that we would need a minimum threshold of 60% testing. So we would want to give a survey. We are thinking that this would be something that may have some benefit in January and February, particularly if we were going to go in that direction. But there's nothing that says that we couldn't extend that if we thought we needed to or whatever. The original thinking was you've got a holiday surge. You've still got the issue with the weather. And then, can you try to safely run schools in a period of substantial risk? If you're going to do that, will this help us keep the schools open and get to the point where the vaccine becomes available for teachers, and this type of thing becomes less of a concern? So the options that I laid out, all with the obvious associated costs, would be higher the more testing that you do. So, but the first option would be that we make the program available to all employees and students and required of athletes. The second would be that we make it available to all 612 students, require athletes, and also make it available to all employees. We'd make it available to all employees under any of these potential options. And the third is that we would start out with everybody in the pool that is participating, and then perhaps monitor the elementary rates. And if it looks like that's not something that we need to be overly concerned about, we could cut back on that.
And can you just clarify on why that might not be as much of a concern in the elementary schools?
Well, as we understand it right now, even though there have been, issues, in fact, we've had several issues recently this past week with elementary children being positive. So I don't know, if that data is going to change over time, and we're going to learn something in a couple of weeks that's different than we know now. I mean, that's the way this whole thing goes. But it appears as if the incidence rates in the younger children there's less positives and less risk of transmission.
I'm sorry if I may, less risk of transmission, but the risk to the staff is increased. So I know that the student, it's not affecting the students as much, the younger students, but it is a concern for the staff.
How
many staff have to be quarantined?
Yeah, it's a concern for keeping everybody healthy. It's also a concern for keeping the doors open, because the more times that you have kids with symptoms and ultimate exposures and positives and all that kind of stuff, and the contact tracing, it's when you're in substantial risk, it's going to be difficult to maintain the staffing. I anticipate that it's going to be extremely difficult to maintain the staffing no matter what we do. This may help a little bit.
And then one other thing, could you explain the type of testing that we're talking about?
The type of testing we're talking about is a saliva test. It's a surveillance screening. If there is a positive, the people would need to go and get a test before they would be allowed to come back to school.
So can you explain why this test is not definitive? Why, if you test positive, then you need a test?
Well, it's not approved by the FDA yet. I mean, I don't know all the science of it. And I just know that with the surveillance testing and the saliva tests, that is what the medical community says needs to happen, is that if you have a positive, you have to go and get tested. Well, I don't want to call it a screener, because I actually think that means something else as well, but it's a surveillance test. It's an initial indication of whether or not, somebody, it's an attempt to try to catch asymptomatic carriers or, people that maybe think they have a cold because they have allergies, so they don't know the difference and they think they're fine, but maybe they actually are positive or whatever. It's just.
So the people that are trying to sell us this test, did they provide you with numbers for the rate of false negatives and false positives?
Yes, they did. It's in the information that I provided in a packet, in the board packet, the first time we talked about this. And what I have
been able to see was your memo that you sent via email.
Yeah, no, this when we first talked about testing, I included the information from the company. And this was as of October 19th, 2020. So, I could probably get updated numbers from them, but as of October 19th, 2020, 9,500 samples and no false positives.
And do they provide you with information regarding the districts that they currently contract with? How many COVID cases have they detected?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
And would it make any sense for our staff to test, since those are the people that we're trying to protect?
No, I don't think so. I think it needs to be the overall population of the number of people that are involved in the pool of people that are coming into our buildings. I mean, I think that that's a little bit troubling to me, particularly at the upper grade levels where we know that it's a little bit more prevalent.
Yeah, so the CDC says that they've found that 50% of all COVID cases are contracted at home. So we would test kids. Those tests would be good for a maximum of 2 days that they're in school. And, then they go home for 5 days and then they come back to school. So they need to be tested every single week.
They would be tested every week, correct?
So my first observation is we could save half the cost of testing by, instead of having kids come to school 2 days a week, have kids come to school 4 or 5 days a week and just alternate the weeks that they come to school. But that doesn't mitigate the fact that I think the testing's a waste of money. We should invest in providing our teachers and our students with masks, face shields if they need them. I mean, I think PPE is a better investment.
Right.
Well, we already do that.
Right. And just, since we're just talking of opinions, my thought is that this testing, it's another mitigating factor. It's another safety measure. Without a doubt, we need the 6 feet. Without a doubt, we need masks. And this testing is another way to mitigate the potential risk of outbreaks in schools and having to close the schools again. So we can continue to operate in substantial transmission. And these things may change.
Well, I've said before, Margaret and everybody, I've said before, I'm not necessarily standing here advocating and saying that this is absolutely the way I think we need to go. The board asked me many months ago to look into testing, which I've done. And I think we need to make a decision if you want us to have that as part of our process when we bring the kids back in January.
Right. And I think that's what we're having a discussion about, right? That's the discussion. So we weren't suggesting you were advocating. We were giving our opinions on the values that we thought that the test would offer.
Yeah.
I think that, I would prefer to, if we're going to do broad-based testing, just given the flaws in the process that you highlight, Dave, and some that Jim highlighted as well, that it would be used in conjunction with accelerating the process of getting kids back into school, not necessarily just to return to what we were doing before. Because I think the data say that the model we were operating before is, schools have not been proven to be spreader environments for COVID in that environment with the safety protocols that we already had in place. And I think the case for that has been bolstered in recent weeks in several respects. We had the districts that didn't close during heightened COVID cases locally and also, nationally, they weren't proven to be super spreader environments despite continuing to operate. I think it's telling that when parents are weighing all of the different benefits and risks of their kids being in person or remote, even more of them are choosing in person, which I think that's an important data point for me, because I think there's a lot of wisdom in that collective, thousands of parents sitting down and thinking about what's best for their child. And in addition to that, we've had numerous members, very senior members of the scientific community in our country, speaking out that they feel that it's healthy for kids to be in school and that they don't believe the data say, and I know that there's always exceptions and qualifiers and all those things, but they seem to be saying en masse, kids should be in school. So with or without testing, I believe our schools need to be open for in-person learning. I think they need to stay open for in-person learning. I'm open to compromise on this if it's, particularly important to my colleagues and staff. But I think the next step, opening schools is step one. And essentially we're returning to, I would say overall, when you consider the three levels, a slightly improved version of what we were operating before. But step two is going to be hopefully accelerating getting kids more in-person instruction, because when I look at the benefits and the costs of this situation, I think the academic damage, the mental health issues, the learning gap. I mean, I think this has been one of the biggest steps backwards for equity in education in decades, closing schools and remote learning. And these are all very important issues. And I would rather use testing to accelerate addressing all those problems to get kids back in school full time than use it to return to a model where I think there's a significant amount of data already indicating that it can be successfully operated.
Well, I would only say two things to that. One, we were successful in managing our buildings when we were in a period of much less community spread. But the second thing that I would say is that, even if we have all of these measures in place and do all of these things, I think it's going to be difficult to maintain staffing as long as, we're in the current situation that we're in. So when it comes to the testing, when it comes to your point about the testing accelerating a return to more in-person learning, I think what it would do if it were successful might be to help us maintain less disruption to the current hybrid model that we are employing. I don't know that I can say that it's going to, with any kind of confidence, that it's going to accelerate returning more kids to school, because even when we get below the barometer of the 8% and the 100 cases, you're still in a situation where you're in a hybrid model. And so if we were to decide that we were going to use testing to, when we're in a hybrid model, to see if the transmission at school is low enough to bring more kids back to school, we could try that as a theory. I just don't know that I can guarantee that that's going to have, that type of an impact. So I don't really know how to respond, to it. I mean, I just
Well, it's
don't.
fine. It was more of a statement, Dave.
Yeah.
We're already talking about a good chunk of our student population, the very young kids, where the data seem to indicate that transmission is less likely. So can we use testing to accelerate getting those kids more hours of in-person learning?
One of the things
I think that would be my preference. Again, I'm open to compromise on it if it's important to my board colleagues and to our staff, but I just wanted to make my views, clear and make sure, like, in my view, the schools need to be open with or without the testing program.
Yeah, and we were talking about, and Chris, thank you. You brought up a good point. We were talking about priorities, and in my mind, the priority list goes to the effect of first opening and then staying open during substantial transmission. And then the third one is accelerating the return. So, my second level priority, I emphasize that my second level priority is to avoid the need to have to go back to a full remote type schedule. So, in my mind, this testing and there, the challenge with the research is there, as you mentioned, there's research that says a multitude of things. So safety and layering of preventive measures, that's the measure I'm using for the idea of testing. So again, priority for me, staying open during the substantial period of transmission, and then accelerating the return to students.
Yeah, I completely agree with Margaret's priority list. And I think we could learn a lot from the districts that have stayed open during this period of increased transmission. I really think it would be worth the time and effort to find out from those districts, have they increased transmission within their schools during this period when the county has seen increased transmission? And there is, developing research. There was a very recent paper out of Harvard School of Public Health that says that 3 feet is all you need for students. And the Washington Post picked it up on November 12th. So there is emerging research every day from the more and more that we learn about this virus. But, 2 other observations is the AMA has not changed their stance. They believe kids need to be in school. The National Medical Association has not changed their stance. They believe the kids need to be in school. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has not changed their stance. They believe the kids need to be in school. So I completely agree that we need to come up with a plan to increase the number of kids in class every day.
So if I could just chime in with a kind of logistical questions. The schools that are using, I guess I should start, Dave, with the first question is the, what did you call it? The surveillance testing that you're proposing. Is this the same surveillance testing that the University of Illinois is using?
No, well, yes, it uses a different enzyme to test, which is more readily available. So,
but the same thing, right? Like it's the saliva test.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And is this the testing mechanism that like LaGrange and Glen Ellen that they're using?
And Nutrier,
And
and I
Nutrier,
think
sorry.
there's another one that recently jumped on, but I can't recall.
Okay. And then have they seen, like, because this is home testing, right? We are giving these kits to families and they are administering these tests at home and then bringing back the saliva swab.
Well, the logistics of how each district does it is a little bit different, but they do it at home. They do it at home.
So they or what you're proposing we do?
I'm proposing that we do it at home and come up with a system that works for us with our capabilities and our number of attendance centers and our available manpower and all of that. Because if we did that, we would be able to do that the day before that they return to campus. So I think that from that standpoint, if we can make the logistics work, that's probably preferable.
And then that option C, where you're, everybody's athletes required, everybody else voluntary, and then you eliminate the testing in grades E5 if there's no positive tests for 2 consecutive weeks. Do you foresee that would be no positive tests that are followed up with the real test that says they're positive, right? Like, so are we going to false positive before we take it out of EC5?
I'm saying that if there are no positives, they don't have to go to a follow-up test if they don't.
Right. I'm worried about the false positives. I'm worried about a positive that kicks in and then somebody gets a, nasal test and it's negative.
Oh,
so
yeah. So we would wait to confirm. We would wait to confirm the second test. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so, yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to that comment. I think you, in your initial comments a couple hours ago, you're going to send a survey out to the community to see how many people would be willing to voluntarily participate in testing.
Yeah, I think that we should do that if we want to pursue it, because if we don't get enough, then I definitely think it's not worth it.
And I would just encourage that you take it one step further in that survey of the community to see how many families would still want in-person learning if the test was mandatory. Because I believe, and I think Margaret has mentioned it a number of times, this is not the end all. Like, this is not the wall that's going to stop it from getting into our schools. But like everything else, I think it's a tool that we can use to keep our students and our population and our staff safer. There's no 100% foolproof solution, but if there's a tool available that we can utilize to make our staff feel safer and our community more protected, then I think we should use it. And I'm curious as to how many families, if it was mandatory, would still agree to it and then participate in it, and still want to go in person if it was mandatory. So I would just encourage that, since we're sending out this survey, if we could kind of get a gauge on where the community is voluntary versus mandatory, if that would change their in-person preference.
So are you saying theoretically, so Marianne said 85% or whatever the number was, that we're over 85% slightly now. So
Yeah.
You're saying that if testing was mandatory, do you think that more people in the other 15% would want to come back? Is that that's what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a gauge on that. I'm trying to understand it. Yeah. So
I don't think, we're sending the survey. We can
that's-
follow the survey.
right. That's what I was like, all right, we're sending the survey out. Let's just add that in. And I also, when we go back to talking about tools to do the best we can, so just a couple things, 3 things are going through my mind, but when we talk about that self-certification form that all of our students have to fill out, I really do think that we should add in the question about travel outside of the state, right? Like, there's not a self-certification form that I fill out, and there's at least one a day that I'm filling out that doesn't ask about travel. And I think that we should be adding that in to our district, because into our self-certification. I think it's
we talked about adding that. RJ says we can do that. That's not a problem.
Great. I would really like to see that added in, because it does add another level of just kind of consciousness, right? Like, that's all we want to do, is we want people to start thinking about the choices they're making. And if they have to answer that question, I think it just brings it to the front of their thinking, as opposed to just not considering it all. And I just have to say, I do agree with Chris that I think this is a tool, because when we come back after January 11th, and I'm confident that our community is going to do their part, right? Like, I have confidence in this community that they're going to do their part, and we're going to stay in school, and we're not going to see those school transmissions, and we're going to have testing. I do agree that it's a money worth spending if it's going to push us to the next level, right? If it's going to be one of those factors in the 3rd category of metrics, or the policy that we passed, or what we passed about how to keep our kids in school, I think it can be a factor added in that our testing shows that we don't have school transmission. So I do think that it's not the reason we'll go to full, but it's between that and the vaccination that our teachers by the end of February should have available to them. I think those considerations in place will help us get to the position where we can be full back in our business.
Yeah, I think that, I look at it this way. Obviously, everybody wants the kids back in school full time, as often as possible, as soon as possible. And, if we were able to demonstrate that we are having very, very low rates of transmission, and we take that information and we visit with the doctor and get some input and inform our decisions and everything else, and decide that we can indeed bring more kids back, then that would be great. I just don't know that I can guarantee that that's going to be a result of this.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I get none of us, I think if anything's taught anybody in the last 9 or whatever, 10 months, is that there are no guarantees. The information changes weekly, it changes daily. So I think we just have to make the best decision. But I think it's important for everybody to understand that that is the goal. And we're going to do everything we can as a board and as a district to put into place the safety and security protocols and whatever tools we can use to achieve that goal. And I think testing is part of it. I think holding people accountable to their certifications before coming in the building is a part of it. And I think just as much as you got how hard the district's working, the teachers are, everybody's working, you know, the community has to work hard too. And we have to be on the same page and we have to work together as a team. And I don't think I could think of a better 3-step plan than Margaret's, because I truly do believe that sums up it sums up everything I think everybody feels, and everybody has to be invested in that plan for it to succeed. We have to be on the same page. Us, the district, the community, teachers, the union, everybody has to be on that same page to proceed on the plan for us to be successful. So I am in support of testing if we're moving forward to that goal of achieving that.
And I can sign up for that type of approach. And I like Margaret's list as well. But, you know, if we're doing widespread testing and it's not showing a lot of cases, and then we're not getting more kids into schools, I'm going to be upset. Because, you know, I think that that's what needs to happen here. And, you know, if we're going to be doing the testing, I want it as a preventative tool. And I think it can add value in that way. But it also provides another data set. And if we have a data set like that shows that COVID cases are low and we don't react to it, that's not going to make any sense to the community. And it won't make any sense to me either. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what's the point of spending up $500,000 if it's not to push the ball forward?
It ties back to the scheduling discussion. You know, I mean, like, I'm not tethering my opinion for the entire second semester to the schedule that we just discussed, right? As vaccines roll out, as we get more data comes out, right? I hope our schedule can move to where we have all these kids in school 5 days a week as soon as possible. So, and I know, I'm sure that, Dave, I know you're already thinking that, so you don't have to respond, but I just wanted to make that clear to folks that are listening in. It's a starting point.
Just wanted to weigh in on the testing a bit. We're here having this conversation because, for reasons that have already been mentioned, there's a multitude of reasons that it's important to get kids back in school. And what we're talking about is, how can we do that? How can we best do that? And for me, the continuity of the educational experience is very important. So if we already have great procedures in place, our staff and our students have done a fantastic job of following those procedures. We haven't been in this exact situation that our community is in right now with COVID cases. I think this, like Margaret said, is another layer on top of the things that we're already doing that could keep us in a more continual educational situation for our kids, and possibly help us with quarantines and being able to uphold staffing and keep things moving forward. And if our numbers are low and we want to revisit where we're at after we're doing the testing for a while, then that would be great. And we could talk at that point about what the next steps could be, hopefully, you know, moving towards having more kids in school. What I do know about what I've heard about neighboring districts that have had these tests in place is that they have been able to sustain those models of having kids in school longer because of the testing. So I would love to get more information about what their experience has been and what their thoughts are. to us on their testing. But from what I see, the schools that have been able to stay in and maintain a consistent model are the districts that are doing testing. So I would be for it if that's.
Yeah, what I do know is that when Glen Ellen and New Trier were remote, they were still testing kids because they used that information to see when they thought they could bring them back, if that would be a prudent decision. So, you know, it has served different purposes for different districts depending on the situation. But at any rate, I think you're right, personally, that if it becomes a tool that can prevent as much disruption as possible to the continuity of the experience, you know, that is a potential positive.
Well, and while we know we want to have kids back in school, safety, of course, is for our students and staff is first and foremost. So any way that we can, you know, make that even better, I am for it.
I think we get a higher return on investment by investing first in staff education and educating all of our staff members to the greatest extent possible of how this disease spreads and what they can do to protect themselves. After we invest in that, then I think we should have a discussion about testing. But the only conceivable way I could see testing is to be, as Chris said, to be used as a tool to increase the number of kids that are in person in our classrooms.
Well, I think that's what we're all hoping it could help us move towards, right?
Okay, anybody else? All right, so just a couple follow-up questions, I guess. When I'm curious about when that survey, I mean, would you send the survey before we decide for sure if we're going to test, or would you?
I think we would write the motion and get it approved so we can get all the infrastructure ready to go in such a way that says if, you know, if that condition is met, then the administration's authorized to, you know, proceed or something along those lines. I mean, you know, I don't know that we can get everything up and running if there's no action on Tuesday in time for January. The testing company would need to order tests, you know, so I think that the motion would be written in such a way where there'd be, you know, it'd be contingent on that factor being met.
And would the factor be the survey indicates a 70% willingness to participate?
60 was the minimum that was recommended to me.
Can you explain why 60 is a significant number and that would prevent the spread? I don't see how 60%. I can see like the U of I on their campuses where they have a closed campus, they test 100% of the people there. That would be a way to prevent the spread of the disease. But to test 60% of the people who go home every night, where 50% of all the cases are transmitted, and then come back the next day, come back the next week, somebody's got to explain to me how 60% can stop or deter the spread of this disease. I don't understand it.
Now, I do feel like 60% is a pretty low bar for us to invest that amount of money. And listen, the survey might come back, it's like 90%, right? Like, so it might be a moot point, but I do think we need to establish some minimum bar that we're comfortable with investing in if we meet that. And I don't know that 60%, I think Jim has a very good point that, you know, 60%, is pretty low.
I don't really care what number you pick. I don't. I asked the doctor. He
Yeah,
said
no,
the more the
that's a great point, Dave, right? Like you're just passing us the
better.
information.
If
Right.
it's below 60%, don't do it. That's the absolute minimum
Right.
threshold for you to get any kind of meaningful information.
Right. No, that's a great point. And I don't think I was pushing that back to you. I think I was pushing it back to the board. Like, where do we feel comfortable that it would be meaningful? But I get the 60% from the doctor, but you know, I don't know. I think my question was more, and I think Jim's was as well, like to the board, what's our bar?
Well, I think one thing too, and I'll circle back, Courtney, to that is the, you know, can we make sure that we have some sort of a statistically significant sample of 90 people out of 8,500 students? You know, like that's not going to be enough. So
Well, I think Mary Ann, you know, she'll be able to run the numbers on the results to know if we have enough results to be considered statistically significant.
yeah, and I would, you know, I mean, can't we write the motion to have some flexibility in it where, you know, basically the administration consults with the board after we see the results, essentially, and you know, we can spend additional time asking these physicians and specialists, you know, about the statistical threshold, because I don't personally feel that I have the expertise to say that it should be 60 or 72 or 80, you know. Anyway, I think I've made my views on testing clear. So I'm open to compromise if it's important to you all.
I think my question is, Dave, so say we pass this motion on Tuesday night that says whatever the number is, right? And then you do the survey. I mean, so you're gonna contract with this testing company after we pass this motion, but then say we do the survey and it's, you know, we don't meet that threshold. Like I guess I'm trying to figure out your timeline to make this happen. And it seems like a very small timeline, because if we, you know, today is the 10th, we're gonna vote, is it the 10th? We're gonna vote on the 15th. If we pass this motion, you're gonna call the company on the 16th. Even if I have confidence that the survey is going to be ready to go out the night of the 15th or the morning of the 16th. How much of a turnaround time are you going to give people to respond to that survey so you can make a decision whether or not to actually enter into a contract with the company so that we can begin those testings on January 10th?
So I told you that, or I think you know, or you've heard before, you know, that Franzic is the attorney of record with both New Trier and Glen Ellen. So I already have the contract that we can enter into with the company prepared. All we have to do is write the number of tests that we're planning to order in there, assuming that we go forward. So that they have to plan to make sure that they order enough of the enzymes that they do the test with, that they can process all the tests. So they have to have some idea how many tests are coming in. And, you know, so if we were to test people on January 10th, you know, and we've got the holidays in there, I don't have really a lot of latitude for turnaround to think that we could have that ready to go. That's why we're trying to get it on this board meeting.
Right. So we vote Tuesday night, and the survey goes out Tuesday night or Wednesday morning. You'll give people what, 5 days till Sunday night, Wednesday to Sunday night to respond.
How do we send a survey out saying if we were going to put testing in place, what?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You typically
can't we do that now?
Yeah, well, you typically like to give people 2 weekends on a survey, but you know, if we don't have that luxury and we got something out immediately,
to Beth's point,
with the idea that, you know, it's all hypothetical either way, so we just get it out there and we find out how many people are interested. You know, we can do that. We don't have to wait till Wednesday morning.
Yeah,
Well,
I
then
mean,
we'd have that information to use on Tuesday, or I don't know if we'd
Yes.
have the information, but we'd have the information, a little bit earlier.
Right. Right. And is it, since we have the contract, is it possible that you share the contract too, just so we can see what the contract
Well, that's going to be in,
contains?
that's going to be in, that was going to be in the board packet.
Okay. Okay, so we'll get that out soon so we can see that ahead of time, what's included in the
board
contract.
packet will go out tomorrow. We had to wait until after this meeting.
Okay,
So
so
that's
good.
why it's going out tomorrow.
So it will be. All right. Because again, the point that was made about the flexibility, that's what we're trying to understand. If it's already in the contract, that's great to know, but we don't know that. So I think that's why some of these questions are coming up.
Now, are we also going to have a motion funding staff education?
I can bring in somebody and pay them for staff education without you having to vote on it at a meeting.
Are we going to do that? I think that's a far better return on investment.
I thought that we had thought that we would ask the teachers if they thought that that would be something they would be interested in. Isn't that what was said?
I don't recall that.
Yeah, I think we did talk about asking the teachers because again, I think everyone believes that they're up to date on this information and everyone believes that they have all of the information. So, trying to make sure that this training would be helpful.
Margaret, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like anything else. We might think it's great, but if the teachers aren't interested in it, then when you talk about your return on investment, it really isn't a good one. Like we might think, hey, let's get educated on it. But if teachers are not on that same page, so I do agree there should be a survey to see if they
From a
are.
return on investment standpoint, that's not going to be a huge expenditure anyway.
Well, then why don't we just do it?
Jim, if you would like me to just do it, I'll just do it. How's that? I'll take our professional learning time that is supposed to be focused on student data and we'll bring somebody in and give them facts about COVID, if that's what you want me to do. But I would like that to be a board decision.
I'd prefer to hear if the teachers are interested in it first. I really would, because I don't want to take away from the professional development time that they have to do the things that we need to do to make education better. So I would rather have us to hear from the teachers first, in my opinion.
Dave, don't we have like obligations for that time per the state as well?
Yes, but
Like a late start or something. I guess I'm curious, how about, I don't know. We don't have late start anymore, do we?
Look, I don't think that,
It's at the end of the day. We still have it.
Oh, well, okay.
Why don't you just have a discussion with the senior leadership of our union, see if they have interest, and let's go from there.
And maybe it could be.
I think it is a good idea. I like Jim's idea. If that's something they're interested in, let's spend the money on it. And I'd be open to valuable to our staff. So let's ask them, see what they have to say.
Just to help everyone understand, January 6th has an agenda with representatives from across the nation presenting to our staff. We have almost 13 representatives. I just want to express that in terms of finding another time for this opportunity. I would be in a really difficult situation if we sacrifice that date.
Maybe a late start in the afternoon.
I mean, I think there's time built in that, like, I do not think we should sacrifice that date, Scott. Like I don't think anybody's suggesting, but I think this is not a full day event. I think this is somebody coming in for an hour that we can kind of build in somewhere to make, give our teachers the information they need. At least that's how I feel or view it. I was thinking about it.
All right. So that can happen. Okay. Just one question that I have about the contract is this, if we do a contract for testing, are we locked into that number of tests? Like, or is it, do you know what I mean? Like, are we,
Oh, there's some flexibilities. There's a minimum guarantee. There's a range. There is, you know, I think I have to go back and look at the contract again, but I think that there's some advanced notice types of provisions and some things like that.
okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure we weren't like locked into one certain amount where we might not have the survey back. And so, okay, so is that cover testing?
No, I don't think that would be a problem. No. The timing of that, no, that would not be an issue, I don't think.
All right, so I think that covers testing. You know, there's, you know, we want to know the survey whenever that can happen, because that obviously affects, but there's flexibility. All right, so we've talked about testing, the schedule. What else are we missing? Anything else? Oh, can you just address contact tracing? Because that's something that, especially in substantial, can you just, have we hired a contact tracer?
Luke and Kevin, I know that I thought I had heard that we had some interviews set up. Did we identify a person?
We're in the process of screening applicants. We had over just under 300 applicants. Doesn't mean that all 300 are qualified, but we're going through the applicants to whittle that down to hopefully bring in about 7 or 8 candidates.
And I think that it is possible that we're going to need more than one. I mean, you know, we don't have to commit, because I think that I think that these people, they're not necessarily going to be guaranteed X number of hours. I think, right? I mean, we're using them as we need them, and we may need, you know, we may need more manpower in January than we originally thought when we, you know, originally approached you about the position. But we are going to utilize the services of another local doctor who has agreed to sit down and advise us on making sure that our contact tracing processes are sound and consistent and up to date with the latest guidance that continues to come out, and serve in that capacity for us to help support that effort.
And then after you sit down with the contact tracer and that doctor, and I assume Kevin and Luke maybe are part of that.
Well, Jen Conwell for sure too.
Can there be a communication that really talks about what that process is going to look like for our families? And, you know, as we move into, you know, January, that then there's just, you know, here's what this looks like, and, you know, expect this to happen if there's a case. Can that happen?
Yeah, sure. Bev's nodding her head. That means yes.
I didn't see her nodding her head.
Yes. Yes, it can happen.
Thank you. Because that was another piece to, you know, when you look at the metrics that we put in with some flexibility, it's contact trace, you know, what are some other levels of that we put in to go back to the safety piece in getting more kids, and back to Margaret's 3-point plan there of open, stay open, and accelerate more kids in the building. So any other questions or follow-ups?
Just one thing, Kara, about the quarantines, that there may be some new information coming out about that. So maybe if that changes for us, we could also add to that communication for families. And since we haven't been back in for a while, just to really help parents understand that they can keep their child home if they think that they need to, or they're unsure, so that people feel comfortable with the process and know exactly how it works and what everyone should be doing. I'm sure that information is going to go out anyway if we are coming back into the buildings, but I know some of those pieces might be changing. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on how to operate.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Chris?
Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, I know it's getting late, but I know that staffing is a constant challenge during these times, and because of quarantine rules and a variety of factors. And so I just wanted you to, we've talked about this in the past, but can you just highlight how many subs we have today relative to what we would typically have in a year where COVID is absent? Maybe start there.
Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
normally have, as of last year, we had 233 active subs. We actually still have 233 active subs, but only 29 of them are taking assignments as of right now.
Okay. And is there a website or is there a place on our website where folks in the community who are interested and would be willing to sub can go as a resource?
We always have an active sub posting, so they can link to that via our website. The sub position is always open, but I have to reiterate again that they must get the ISB certification to be considered for a sub.
What about the supervisor? Don't we have an option sometimes to, there's some flexibility in supervision?
No, there is now what's called a short-term sub, and they waive the requirement of having a bachelor's degree or higher if you are a regular sub. If you have 60 hours, ISB will consider you for a short-term sub, but you can't work in any one position more than 4 days in a row.
I'm asked frequently by folks in the community what they can do to try to help, get schools open, keep them open. And I always say, help find subs. And so, for those who are listening, if you have any contacts or willingness to do so, please listen to what Luke had to say. And hopefully there's the ability to expand that number.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just make a quick statement, if anybody's interested into getting a substitute license, applying with the Illinois State Board of Education, it takes a little bit of time, but it's not too long. And you just need to submit your official transcripts, fill out the application, pay your fee, and then the rest is up to ISB. As soon as they process that, they'll give you the sub certification.
I had a parent in the district come to me who said that they are a certified sub. They signed up on our website and they've never been contacted. What are they doing wrong that they haven't been contacted by us? They're not interested in they said they've only been offered a permanent sub position, and they can't do a permanent sub, but they could do a day-to-day.
If anybody's listening and you do have the certification and you've applied and you haven't heard from us, reach out to either myself or Dana Zarnicki, the HR coordinator.
Okay.
Just email me, and our emails are on the website under Human Resources.
I'll pass that on. Thanks.
Okay, anything else? All right, well, it's only 10:15, right? Okay, real quick, we have December 15th, 2020, regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock, January 12th, 2021, Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock, and January 26th, 2021, regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock. All right, thank you everybody for hanging in there and doing this marathon so we could wrestle with some of this. I really appreciate it. I know the community's listening, and it's appreciate all the dedication for kids. So thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a good night.
Thank you all.